In the spectacular series of events that occurred on September 11, 2001, the fate of United Airlines Flight 93 has always been earmarked as significant. Due to a number of factors, United 93's story ended with a remarkable twist that has forever changed the complexion of that day in history. Of all 4 planes hijacked that day, United 93 was the only one that did not succeed in its mission of destroying its target. Though the plane ended up crashing in a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, and none of the passengers, crew, or hijackers survived, it has served as the somewhat bright ring underneath clouds that have hung very heavy and very dark for the past 14 years. Flight 93 was the flight that fought back. It was the one blip in an otherwise successful terrorist mission. We were hit hard, and there's no denying that. But United 93 was us giving the terrorists a sturdy kick to the groin as they left us to bleed and suffer. We couldn't stop them. We couldn't prevent a massive loss of life. We couldn't prevent the tragedy they were so hell-bent on inflicting upon us. But we weren't about to sit and sulk either. United 93 was a small success in a day of massive losses. It was our message to the rest of the world. This cannot destroy us. The chain of events and reasons are as clear as crystal in retrospect. Everything falls into place when looking backwards. Though the hijacking followed the template of the other 3 that had already been carried out by the time United 93's hijackers attacked, little details about time made what happened practically inevitable. First of all, the flight was delayed for over 40 minutes due to heavy congestion. The plane took off at 8:42, only 4 minutes after American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. For reasons we are still unsure of, Ziad Jarrah waited 46 minutes after takeoff to begin the assault. The other hijacker cell struck immediately after the fasten seatbelt sign was turned off. For whatever reason, the hijackers of United 93 waited, and by doing so probably sealed their fate and the fate of all on board the airplane. Without this time gap, passengers on board Flight 93 would likely not have had enough time or information to realize the full scope of what was taking place and what they were inadvertently involved in. Without this time gap, Flight 93 would have been no different than any of the other planes hijacked that day, and the complexion of 9/11 would have been infinitely darker. At 9:02, having learned of the situation unfolding at the World Trade Center, Melody Homer, wife of co-pilot Leroy Homer, sent an ACARS message to her husband asking if he was okay. 2 minutes later, the pilots received a second message. Beware any cockpit intrusion. 2 aircraft hit World Trade Center. Captain Jason Dahl replied in confusion, "Ed, confirm latest message, please. Jason." It would be one of the last normal communications from the flight. The assault took place at 9:28, the plane dropping 685 feet in just 30 seconds as the pilots and hijackers fought for the controls.
They want just so we can them on
It is not known exactly when the hijackers took control of the plane, but it is believed that Captain Dahl survived the initial attack, as moaning can be heard on the cockpit voice recorder as the hijackers continuously rebuke someone in the cockpit. Jarrah, thinking he was transmitting over the plane's announcement intercom system, inadvertently sent this message to air traffic control.
The captain, please sit down. Keep remaining sitting. We have a ball board. So,
A woman, presumably first-class flight attendant Debbie Walsh, is heard struggling with the hijackers before being killed.
Hi, this is the captain. I would like to all remain seated. We have a bomb aboard and are going to taxi to the airport and our demand so please remain quiet.
This was the final transmission from United 93. Starting at 9:30, passengers began using GTE airphones and mobile phones to connect with officials and family. 35 airphone calls and 2 cell phone calls were made from Flight 93. 10 passengers and 2 crew members were able to successfully connect, providing and receiving information from people on the ground. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and they began to grasp the true nature of what they were now a part of, and, almost as instantly, the decision was made that they were alone in this and needed to mount their own offensive if they wanted any chance whatsoever to survive. The passengers voted on whether to rush the hijackers. The yeses won. Another ACARS message was sent to United 93 at 9:43 a.m. Heard report of incident. Please confirm all is normal. Some of the passengers still on the phone ended their calls. Sarah Bradshaw told her husband, "Everyone is running up to first class. I've got to go. Bye." Other lines were kept open as the struggle for United 93 began and raged on for 6 full minutes, starting at 9:57. By this time, Flight 77 had struck the Pentagon, and 175 had struck the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The hijackers became aware of the revolt at 9:57:55, and Ziad Jarrah, the pilot hijacker, began to roll the plane left and right, referred to by pilots as rocking the wings, to knock the passengers off balance.
Okay, what altitude is that Boeing, that United at, sir?
He's behind us and only about 1,000 feet above us. That's confirmed. It looks like he's rocking his wings, according to my observer. Keeps rocking back and forth.
At 9:59:52, exactly when the south tower began to collapse, Jarrah began pitching the nose of the plane up and down to disrupt the assault. The sounds of crashing, screaming, and the shattering of glasses and plates could be picked up on the CVR. After stabilizing the plane at 10 o'clock, Jarrah gave the first mention of crashing short of their target due to the passenger revolt, but was rebuked by a fellow hijacker in the cockpit. He then resumed pitching the plane up and down. A passenger in the background cried, "In the cockpit. If we don't, we'll die." 16 seconds later, another passenger yelled, "Roll it," probably referring to the use of a food cart as a battering ram against the cockpit door, which the CVR then picked up. Jarrah ceased the violent maneuvers at 10:01 and recited the takbir several times. He then asked again if they should abort their original mission and crashed the airplane. This time, his fellow hijacker agreed. Nevertheless, the passengers continued their assault. At 10:02:17, an English-speaking male voice said, "Turn it up." A second later, a hijacker replied, "Pull it down, pull it down." At 10:02:33, one of the hijackers was heard to plead, "Give it to me," several times, as the plane plummeted into a nosedive with the yoke turned hard to the right. The airplane rolled upside down as one of the hijackers began shouting the takbir. Amidst the sounds of the passenger counterattack, the aircraft picked up speed, whooshing and shrieking on the recorder, before crashing into an empty field in Stony Creek, Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. The 9/11 Commission report concluded that the hijackers remained at the controls, but must have judged that the passengers were only seconds from overcoming them. However, many of the family members who have listened to the cockpit voice recording believe that the passengers breached the cockpit and struggled with the hijackers for control. Nobody knows, or ever will know, for sure. First responders arrived on the crash site at 10:06. 1 minute later, Cleveland Center air controllers, unaware that the flight had crashed, notified the Northeast Air Defense Sector that Flight 93 was a suspected hijack. This was the first time the military had been notified about U-93. One final ACARS message was sent to United 93 at 10:10. Don't divert to DC. Not an option. Our trip to Shanksville was pleasant and uneventful. With a rental car far too fancy for our needs and enough snacks to feed a small army, we trekked down Interstate 80 and enjoyed the scenery of trees just beginning their autumnal death dance. Somerset County is a very beautiful part of Pennsylvania, Americana farmland popping up in between massive forests of multicolored trees. We stayed at a Comfort Inn in Somerset right off the turnpike, surrounded by so many places to eat that we were spoiled for choice. There was some initial confusion with tickets, but once that was sorted out, we proceeded to the visitor center and got in line behind a massive amount of bikers who had shown up for some reason. We were the last ones in for the day. There was nobody in line after us. The visitor center/museum was powerful. They made a lot out of the little they had to work with. After impacting with the ground at over 560 miles per hour, there was little left of even the plane, let alone the passengers or their belongings. It was set up into separate walls, with each one displaying some kind of artifact, along with quotes from the passengers, ATC or safety officials, and journalists. They had a loop of a collection of breaking news footage running. They also had a loop of the FAA's official black box animation playing on one console. Only a transcript of the plane's CVR or cockpit voice recorder has been released. The audio has never been published, despite appeals to do so by the victims' families. We ended our visitor center tour by braving the chill and wind to look out over the general area the plane had come down into. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. Coupled with the foreboding wind whipping at you non-stop, it was an intense experience to look out over the field of grass and recently completed footpaths, freshly sprinkled with gravel for traction, and think, this is where it all actually happened. This is where Flight United 93 crashed. In this very spot, 14 years ago, 9/11's most earmarked saga came to an end. What it must have sounded like as the full-sized 757, going far faster than it was ever designed to travel, dove towards the ground, growing louder and louder, shrieking and screaming as the very people inside of it, before there was an immense climax of noise, before complete silence. We decided instead of coming back the next day, we would finish our late afternoon by visiting the memorial. We trekked down the overly long footpath leading from the visitor center to the memorial. Winding to and fro and back and forth, the path was obviously designed to foster a very reflective and contemplative walk. The distance between the two structures was fairly small, but the walk lasted nearly 10 minutes. It was impossible to not feel the somberness, the brooding and meditative solemnness. This was hallowed ground, and you could feel it in the air. The memorial traced the flight path of United 93, a walkway lined with benches and views of the surrounding field, culminating in a marble wall of the passengers' names at the site of the crash. The exact point at which United 93 made contact with the Earth was marked with a boulder. The area is blocked off as only the victims' families are allowed to visit it. The names of every passenger were carved into the wall, the flight attendants noted with barely noticeable markings. There were keepsakes and memorial items placed at some of the names, including one at the foot of Captain Dahl's memorial. I stared at the boulder for a long time. It was numbingly entrancing to me. Very rarely is there something so incredibly final and absolute. At that very spot, on that very day, after a fate so long in the making, ending with such a violent and barbaric struggle for basic survival as a wounded creature fights tooth and nail to ward off its predator with every ounce of remaining strength. Such a primal battle for life and limb was ended quicker than the blink of an eye when the plane collided with the Earth at that exact location. The nanosecond that aircraft made contact, it was all over. Not only the struggle to regain control of the plane, but the lives and stories of everyone on board. I couldn't get that thought out of my head. I kept repeating to myself, until it hit that spot, everyone was alive. Until it hit that spot, everyone was alive. After walking a good length of the memorial and getting to admire the beautiful sights to be seen around such a terrible event, we headed back up the long and winding trail to make our way back to the hotel and back home. The second thought that wouldn't leave me emerged as I looked out over the pretty fields and various colorful flower patches. The scenery doesn't know that it shouldn't be so beautiful. The nature surrounding such a horrible event doesn't know that the horrible event even happened. It doesn't know that it has no right to be so pretty when the area it covered was in fact not only a memorial, but a grave, and not just of the people on the flight. I like to think that even if it somehow could be made aware of what transpired there, if the surrounding trees and grass and flowers and hills could in some way understand and appreciate the severity and tragedy of what took place there 14 years ago, I hope it would still flourish just as beautifully. I hope it would see no reason to dim its colors.